It took J.D. Vance approximately 6 minutes to make Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez realize that clapbacks on Twitter don't work when your opponent actually knows economics, has lived the poverty you romanticize, and comes armed with your complete voting record. The NBC special event had been promoted for weeks. America's economic future, a debate. The network was hoping for fireworks, viral moments, maybe some heated exchanges that would dominate social media for days. What they got was something far more devastating. A systematic dismantling of progressive performance politics by someone who'd actually lived the struggle, earned the credentials, and accomplished real things. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked onto the stage with the confidence of someone who'd spent 6 years being protected by friendly media, celebrated by progressive activists, and insulated from serious intellectual challenge by the echo chamber of social media. She had her talking points ready. Inequality, injustice, billionaires, the working class. She'd practiced her passionate delivery, prepared her emotional appeals, and assumed her massive social media following somehow translated to intellectual credibility. J.D. Vance walked on stage looking like what he was: a Yale law graduate, best-selling author, Marine veteran, and Vice President of the United States, who'd grown up in actual poverty and escaped it through merit rather than performance. He carried a simple leather folder and had that slight smile of someone who knows they've already won because they've done their homework and their opponent hasn't. The moderator, Lester Holt, looked cautiously optimistic. Maybe this would be civil. Maybe this would be substantive. Maybe both sides would make good points and America would benefit from thoughtful discourse. He was wrong on all counts. AOC gave her opening statement first. It was polished, passionate, and entirely predictable. She talked about growing up in a working-class family, about her time as a bartender, about fighting for everyday Americans against corporate greed and billionaire excess. It was a good speech. She'd given versions of it hundreds of times. The progressive audience members applauded enthusiastically. Then Vance spoke. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, thank you for that moving opening statement. Very passionate, very emotional. But here's the thing, and I say this as someone who actually grew up in poverty. Not the kind you perform on Instagram from your luxury apartment. Passion doesn't replace policy. Emotion doesn't substitute for economics. And having millions of Twitter followers doesn't mean you understand how to actually help poor people. He opened his folder. I grew up in Middletown, Ohio, and Jackson, Kentucky. My mom was addicted to drugs. I lived with my grandparents. We were poor. Not my dad was an architect in Westchester County. Poor, but actually poor. I joined the Marines to escape. I went to Ohio State, then Yale Law. I wrote a book about that experience that helped millions of people understand the working class. Then I went into business, created jobs, got elected to the Senate, and now I'm vice president. Vance looked at her directly. You got a degree in economics, bartended for 8 years, won an election by defeating a corrupt incumbent, and then spent 6 years proposing impossible policies, killing jobs in your own district, and building a social media brand. So, let's discuss what actually helps poor people versus what makes you popular on Instagram. Because I've lived both poverty and success. You've performed poverty while living in luxury. There's a difference. The room went silent. AOC's smile had frozen. The progressive audience members stopped applauding. And Lester Holt realized this wasn't going to be the civil discourse he'd hoped for. What happened next wasn't a debate. It was a masterclass in how someone who actually escaped poverty through education and hard work dismantles someone who tweets about poverty from a $3 outfit while killing jobs in her own district. Vance didn't waste time with pleasantries after his opening. He flipped open his folder to the first tabbed section and launched into what could only be described as a cross-examination. Congresswoman, you graduated from Boston University in 2011 with a degree in economics and international relations. Impressive credentials on paper. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you actually used that economics degree? And I don't mean used it to tweet about billionaires or propose trillion-dollar fantasies. I mean actually applied rigorous economic principles to policy analysis. AOC straightened in her chair. I use my economics education every day when I really. Vance interrupted gently. Because after you graduated in 2011, you didn't work as an economist. You didn't work as a financial analyst. You didn't work in any economics-related field. You bartended and waited tables. which is honest work that I respect. But it's not economics. So, you had an economics degree that you didn't use professionally for 8 years. Then you got elected to Congress in 2018 and suddenly you're proposing multi-trillion-dollar economic plans. He pulled out a document. Let's look at what actual economists, people who've spent their careers studying economics, think of your proposals. Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize winner, liberal economist, generally sympathetic to progressive causes, called your Green New Deal not realistic. Larry Summers, Treasury Secretary under Clinton-Obama advisor, said your economic proposals are not serious policy. Even liberal economists who agree with your goals say your understanding of economics is fundamentally flawed. Vance leaned back. Now I went to Yale Law School. I studied under serious legal scholars. I clerked for a federal judge. I practiced law at a major firm. I used my education in my career before running for office. When I write about economics in my book, I cite actual data, actual studies, actual economic research. When you propose economic policy, economists across the spectrum reject it. Why? Because you have a degree you never used professionally. He pulled out more documents. Let's be specific. Your Green New Deal, we'll get to the full disaster of that later, would cost between 51 and 93 trillion, depending on the analysis. That's more than double all federal revenue over 10 years. Did your economics degree not cover basic arithmetic? Did they not teach you that you can't spend 93 trillion when you only have 45 trillion in revenue? Vance's voice was calm, but devastating. You graduated from Boston University with an economics degree. Then you ignored everything that degree should have taught you. You proposed policies that violate basic economic principles. You killed jobs in your own district because you don't understand how tax incentives work. You've become the poster child for credentialism without competence. Having a degree, but not understanding what it means. AOC tried to respond. I worked as a bartender because I come from a working class background and I understand. Stop. Vance held up his hand. I come from Appalachia. My mom was literally a drug addict. I lived with my grandparents in a house that barely qualified as habitable. We were poor. Actually poor. Not my dad was an architect in Westchester. Poor. You had parents who could afford to send you to Boston University. That's not working class. That's middle class. I joined the Marines to escape poverty. We both got educated, but I actually used my education before claiming to be an expert. He pulled out her Green New Deal resolution. You took an economics degree and then proposed this, a plan that would cost more than World War II, that includes economic security for those unwilling to work. That would require retrofitting every building in America in 10 years. That's not using your education, Congresswoman. That's ignoring everything your education should have taught you about scarcity trade-offs and basic math. Vance looked at the camera. The difference between us is simple. I got an elite education and used it to understand problems and propose solutions. She got an elite education and ignored it to propose fantasies. I used my education to escape poverty and help others understand how to do the same. She uses her education as a credential while proposing policies that economists say would hurt the poor. Credentials without competence is just expensive ignorance with a diploma. Round 1. Vance dismantles her credentials. Share if you're tired of fake expertise. Vance flipped to the next section in his folder, pulling out a series of photographs that made the audience gasp. They were photos from the 2021 Met Gala showing AOC in an elegant white gown with bold red letters on the back. Tax the rich. Let's talk about September 13, 2021, the Met Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. One of the most exclusive, expensive, elite events in America. Tickets cost $35. That's the median American household income for an entire year. Congresswoman, let's discuss the irony, or more accurately, the hypocrisy of wearing a designer gown that says tax the rich to a party that costs what most Americans make in a year. He spread the photos out. You attended this event wearing a custom Aurora James gown. When questioned about it, you said the ticket was borrowed or comped, meaning you got it free. But the dress was custom made for you. Who paid for that? The designer. Aurora James. Who you're promoting? Let's talk about Aurora James. Vance pulled out tax documents. Aurora James, the designer who made your tax the rich dress, owed over $100 in back taxes and unpaid wages to her workers. So, You wore a tax the rich dress made by someone who didn't pay their taxes or their workers. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. He showed more photos from the event. Here you are posing with celebrities worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Here you are laughing and enjoying an event where tables cost $200 to $300. All while your Twitter feed was full of posts about inequality and the suffering of working people. You spent an evening with the ultra-wealthy elite at an event your constituents couldn't dream of affording. And you called it making a statement. Vance pulled out financial analysis. The median household income in America is approximately $35. That's what one ticket to this party cost. You spent an evening at a party that costs what a working family lives on for a year wearing a custom designer dress. Socializing with billionaires and celebrities. And you called it class solidarity. That's not solidarity. That's participating in elite culture while wearing a slogan. He showed photos of her luxury apartment from her own social media. You live in a luxury apartment building in DC that costs $2.800 per month. Your building has a rooftop pool, concierge service, high-end finishes. The median rent in your district in Queens is about $1.800 for family housing. You pay more for your solo luxury apartment than your constituents pay to house their families. Vance's voice got harder. You wear designer clothes worth thousands of dollars. You've been photographed in custom suits, designer accessories, expensive glasses. Fashion blogs track your wardrobe because it's expensive enough to be newsworthy. You dine at expensive restaurants in DC. You travel first class. You live a luxury lifestyle that your constituents can't afford. And then you lecture about inequality. He looked directly at her. I grew up sharing a bedroom with my sister in my grandparents' house. We didn't have a rooftop pool. We didn't have a concierge. We didn't go to parties that cost $35. When I made money from my book, I lived modestly because I remember what it's like to have nothing. You make $174 a year and live like you make $500. Where's the money coming from? And how dare you lecture about inequality while living in luxury? AOC was flushed. I was making a statement about the concentration of wealth. You were attending a party that working people can't afford. Vance's voice rose slightly. You wore a dress they can't afford, custom made by a designer who didn't pay her taxes or her workers. You socialized with people worth hundreds of millions. You posed for photos that screamed, "I'm part of the elite now." And you called it activism. That's not a statement about inequality. That's participating in inequality while wearing a slogan for Instagram. Vance pulled out his own book, Hillbilly Elegy. I wrote this book about poverty, about the working class, about the struggles of Appalachian and Rust Belt America. It sold millions of copies. It helped people understand the working class. That's making a statement. Wearing a dress to a party isn't activism. It's performance, and everyone saw through it except your most devoted followers. He leaned forward. The Met Gala indent tells us everything we need to know about you. You're not fighting for the working class. You're not one of them. You're a member of the elite who uses working ass aesthetics for branding. You're champagne socialism in a designer dress. You're everything wrong with performative progressivism. All style, no substance. All brand, no authenticity. Vance exposes the champagne socialist. Comment if you remember this hypocrisy. Vance pulled out what looked like an economic impact study. Pages dense with numbers and analysis. His expression was one of genuine bewilderment mixed with frustration. Let's discuss one of your signature accomplishments. And I use that word ironically. Amazon HQ2. In 2018, Amazon announced they'd build a second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens, your district. Let's talk about what that would have meant, what you did, and what it cost the people you claim to represent. He opened the study. Amazon HQ2, 25.000 to 40.000 jobs. Average salary $150 per year. $3 billion in tax incentives over 10 years. Those are the facts. Now, let's do the math. I know math isn't your strong suit, despite the economics degree. But stay with me. Vance started calculating out loud. 25.000 jobs times $150 average salary equals $3.75 billion in annual wages. Over 10 years, that's $37.5 billion in wages that would have gone to people in New York. Many in your district. Tax revenue from those incomes alone. Approximately $4 billion over 10 years. Corporate taxes from Amazon, approximately $2 billion. Property taxes. Sales taxes from employees spending another $2 billion. We're at $8 billion in new tax revenue. He held up the incentive package. New York agreed to give up $3 billion in tax incentives. That means the state wasn't giving Amazon $3 billion. They were agreeing not to collect $3 billion in taxes. That wouldn't exist without Amazon coming. Net revenue $8 billion collected minus $3 billion not collected equals $5 billion in net new revenue. You saved $3 billion that was never real money in the first place and cost New York $5 billion in net revenue. Vance pulled out job descriptions. Let's talk about these jobs. You claimed they'd be corporate jobs that would gentrify the neighborhood. Let's look at what the jobs actually were. Software engineers. Yes, but also administrators, facilities, managers, food service workers, security personnel, maintenance staff, HR professionals. 25,000 jobs across all income levels. These aren't all billionaires. Congresswoman, these are working people. He showed survey data after you killed the deal. Polls showed 70% of Queens residents wanted Amazon. 70% of your own constituents wanted those jobs. But you opposed it anyway because it fit your anti-corporate narrative. You cost your constituents jobs they wanted because you needed a villain for your social media feed. Vance pulled out follow-up economic studies. Let's look at what happened after Amazon left. Projected property value increases in Long Island City. Didn't happen. Planned investments from businesses anticipating Amazon customers can-led. Restaurant openings. Retail expansion, service industry growth. All dead. You didn't just kill 25,000 Amazon jobs. You killed the ecosystem of jobs those workers would have supported. He did more math. 25,000 workers making 150,000 spend money. They eat at restaurants. They shop at stores. They use services. Economic multiplier effect means each of those jobs supports approximately 2 additional jobs in the service sector. That's 50,000 jobs total affected by your decision. 50,000 jobs. Congresswoman Vance's voice was sharp. Now I worked in venture capital before entering politics. I know how economic development works. You bring companies in, they create jobs. Those workers spend money. That spending creates more jobs. It's basic economics, the kind they should have taught you at BU. But you don't understand that tax incentives aren't cash. You thought New York was writing a check for $3 billion. You celebrated saving money that didn't exist while costing your district billions in economic activity. He pulled out his own economic record. When I was in business, I invested in companies that created jobs in Ohio and Kentucky and communities that needed them. I brought economic opportunity to places that had been left behind. You killed economic opportunity in a place that wanted it. That's the difference between understanding economics and performing for Instagram. AOC tried to defend herself. Those Amazon jobs would have displaced working-class residents through gentrification. Those Amazon jobs would have employed working-class residents. Vance was genuinely angry. Now, $150 salaries for programmers, administrators, facilities, workers. Those are good middle-class jobs. You're telling me people in Queens don't want to make $150? You're telling me those jobs would hurt them? That's the most elitist thing I've ever heard. You decided working people shouldn't have the opportunity to earn good wages because it didn't fit your narrative. Vance gathered the economic studies. You killed 25,000 direct jobs and 25,000 indirect jobs. You cost New York $5 billion in net tax revenue. You prevented massive economic development in a community that wanted it. And you celebrated like you'd won something. You hadn't won. Your constituents lost. They lost jobs, opportunity, and economic growth. But you won Twitter engagement. So I guess that's what matters to you. He looked at the camera. This is what happens when you elect someone who has credentials but no competence. Someone with an economics degree who doesn't understand economics. Someone who values social media performance over actual results. 50,000 jobs lost. $5 billion in revenue gone. Also, she could be the hero who stood up to Amazon. That's not representation. That's sabotage. 3 rounds. AOC's record destroyed. Keep watching. It gets worse. Vance pulled out what looked like the actual Green New Deal resolution. All 14 pages of it with handwritten notes in the margins and multiple tabs marking specific sections. Let's discuss your signature legislative proposal. The Green New Deal. I've read it multiple times. I've studied it, I've analyzed it, and I have to say, Congresswoman, it reads like a college freshman's wish list. Written after binge-watching MSNBC and assuming money grows on trees. Let's talk about the math, which apparently wasn't covered thoroughly enough at Boston University. He opened to the first page. Your Green New Deal resolution co-sponsored with Senator Mare proposes to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions within 10 years. Admirable goal. Impossible execution. Let's go through the specific proposals and calculate what they'd actually cost and whether they're even physically possible. Vance flipped to his notes. Cost estimates from multiple sources. The American Action Forum calculated $93 trillion over 10 years. The more conservative estimates put it at $51 trillion. Let's use the lower number to be charitable. $51 trillion over 10 years. Current federal revenue approximately $4.5 trillion per year, which is $45 trillion over 10 years. Your proposal costs more than all federal revenue. You're already $11 trillion short. And that's using the most conservative estimate. He read from the resolution. Quote, guaranteeing a job with a family-sustaining wage, adequate family and medical leave, paid vacations, and retirement security to all people of the United States. That's a federal jobs guarantee for everyone. 330 million people. Even if only half the population wants these guaranteed jobs. That's 165 million federal jobs. The entire current federal workforce is about 2 million. You're proposing to increase it by 80-fold. Vance flipped pages. Quote, providing all people of the United States with high-quality healthcare. That's Medicare for all estimated at $32 trillion over 10 years. Quote, providing all people of the United States with access to clean water, clean air, healthy and affordable food and nature. How do you propose to guarantee nature to all people? Is the federal government going to mail everyone a tree? He found another section. Here's my favorite. Guaranteeing economic security to all who are unable or unwilling to work. Unable or unwilling. You're proposing to pay people who choose not to work. You're guaranteeing economic security to people who are unwilling to contribute. That's not a social safety net, that's paying people to do nothing. Vance pulled out the infamous FAQ document. You released a FAQ to explain the Green New Deal. It was so embarrassing you deleted it from your website. But the internet is forever, Congresswoman. Let me read from it. We set a goal to get to net zero rather than zero emissions in 10 years because we aren't sure that we'll be able to fully get rid of farting cows and airplanes that fast. You mentioned farting cows in an official policy document. Farting cows. He couldn't help but smile. The FAQ also said you wanted to build out high-speed rail at a scale where air travel stops becoming necessary. You wanted to replace airplanes with trains. How exactly do you take a train from New York to Hawaii or to Europe or anywhere across an ocean? Did you think we'd build trains across the Pacific? Vance pulled out engineering assessments. Let's talk physical possibility. Your plan calls for retrofitting or rebuilding every building in America within 10 years. There are approximately 136 million buildings in the United States. That's 13.6 million buildings per year. 37,000 buildings every single day for 10 years straight. Congresswoman, we don't have the construction workers, the materials, or the physical capacity to do that. It's engineering fiction. He showed energy grid studies. You want to eliminate fossil fuels within 10 years. Fossil fuels currently provide 60% of U.S. electricity. You're proposing to rebuild the entire energy grid. Replace all fossil fuel plants with renewables. Upgrade transmission infrastructure. And do it all in 10 years. The engineers who study this say it would take 30 to 40 years minimum. And that's with unlimited funding. You're proposing a timeline that defies physics. Vance pulled out the legislative record. Let's see how your own party received this brilliant proposal. House vote on Green New Deal. 0 Republicans voted yes. How many Democrats voted yes? Take a guess. 0. Not a single Democrat voted for it when Republicans forced a vote. Your own party wouldn't support it. Even Nancy Pelosi mocked it, calling it the Green Dream or whatever. He looked at AOC seriously. Every economist who's analyzed this says it's impossible to fund. Every engineer who studied it says it's impossible to build. Your own party wouldn't vote for it. But you made it your signature issue. You tied your brand to a proposal so unrealistic that even your allies abandoned it. What does that say about your judgment? AOC was shaking her head. We need bold solutions to address the existential threat of climate change. Bold doesn't mean impossible. Vance raised his voice. Bold doesn't mean ignoring math, physics, and reality. I support environmental protection. I want my kids to inherit a healthy planet. I support investment in clean energy, in conservation, in responsible environmental policy. But your proposal isn't bold. It's delusional. It would cost more than we have, build more than we can, and guarantee things that can't be guaranteed. Vance gathered the documents. The Green New Deal is a fantasy. It's economically impossible, physically impossible, and politically toxic, which is why your own party abandoned it. But you made it your signature issue, which tells us everything about your approach to policy. You don't do serious analysis. You don't calculate costs. You don't consider feasibility. You propose things that sound good on Twitter without caring whether they could actually work. That's not leadership. That's performance art masquerading as policy. 4 rounds of destruction. Vance is methodical. Share this with everyone. Vance pulled out what appeared to be a comprehensive dossier with photos, receipts, and documentation. This was personal, now exposing the gap between AOC's brand and her reality. Congresswoman, your entire political brand is built on being a working-class champion. A former bartender who fights for everyday people against the elite. Let's examine your actual lifestyle versus the image you project on social media. Spoiler alert, there's a gap. A big, expensive, hypocritical gap. He showed photos of her apartment building. You live at the Yards, a luxury apartment complex in Washington, D.C.'s Navy Yard neighborhood. Monthly rent approximately $2,800. Let's see what that buys you. Rooftop pool, fitness center, concierge service, package delivery, pet spa, resident lounge. These are the amenities at your building. Very nice, very expensive, very much not working ass. Vance pulled out comparison data. The median rent in your district in Queens is approximately $1,800 for family housing. You pay more for your solo luxury apartment than your constituents pay to house their families. But you tweet about housing inequality from your rooftop pool. He showed photos from her own Instagram and public appearances. Let's analyze your wardrobe since you've made it public by posting it. Fashion industry analysts estimate you regularly wear clothing worth thousands of dollars. Custom-tailored suits approximately $1 to $2 each. Designer accessories, expensive eyeglasses, professional styling. You're photographed at expensive DC restaurants regularly. You travel first class. It's in the public expense reports. Vance pulled out her old posts. You used to drive a Tesla, a $60 car, while representing one of the most working-class districts in New York. While attacking billionaires and capitalism, you drove a car that costs more than your constituents make in a year. When called out, you tried to delete the evidence. But again, the internet is forever. He showed financial analysis. You make $174 per year. That's a good salary. But you live like you make $300. Where's the money coming from? Your apartment alone is $34,000 per year. Add in your wardrobe, your dining, your travel, your lifestyle. You're spending way more than you make. So, either you have other income you're not disclosing or you're living beyond your means while lecturing others about economic justice. Vance pulled out photos from the Met Gala. Again, we discussed this earlier, but let's reinforce the point. You attended a party where tickets cost $35 wearing a custom designer dress. Socializing with billionaires and celebrities. This isn't working class behavior. This is elite behavior. You're not fighting the elite. You joined them. You're just wearing a tax the rich costume while doing it. He compared to his own background. I grew up in Middletown, Ohio. My mom was a drug addict. My biological father wasn't around. I lived with my grandparents in a small house in a declining town. We were poor. I slept on the couch. We struggled to pay bills. That's actual working class poverty. Not my dad was an architect in Westchester County. Middle class comfort. Vance showed his own modest lifestyle. I wrote a best-selling book. It made good money. I could afford luxury. Instead, I live modestly because I remember what it's like to have nothing. I remember what poverty actually feels like. You grew up in Westchester County, one of the wealthiest counties in America. Your dad was an architect. You went to Boston University. That's not poverty. That's middle-class privilege. He pulled out documentation. Your family owned a home in Yorktown Heights, Westchester County. Do you know what homes cost there? The median home price when you were growing up was over $400. Your high school, Yorktown High School, is rated one of the top schools in New York. This isn't working-ass struggle. This is upper-middle-class suburban comfort. Vance's voice got harder. You've appropriated working-class identity for political benefit. You worked as a bartender for 8 years. Honest work that I respect. But millions of people bartend and don't claim it makes them experts on working-class struggle. You use that bartending experience like it's a Purple Heart. You wave it around as proof you're one of the people. But your lifestyle now, luxury apartment designer clothes, elite social circles, that's not the working class. That's the elite. He looked directly at her. The difference between us is authenticity. I actually grew up poor and I remember it. I live modestly despite success because I know what poverty does to people. You grew up middle class, worked a working class job briefly, and now live like the elite while performing as working ass for political points. You're not representing the working class. You're appropriating their identity while living a lifestyle they can't afford. AOC tried to respond. I worked as a bartender. I understand the struggles. You worked as a bartender 8 years ago. Vance cut her off. Now you live in a luxury building that costs more per month than most bartenders make. Now you wear designer outfits worth more than most bartenders make in a month. Now you socialize at events that cost what bartenders make in a year. You're not a bartender anymore. You're a member of the elite who uses bartending as a prop. Stop appropriating working-class identity while living in luxury. It's dishonest and it's insulting to people who actually struggle. 5 rounds. AOC's image shattered. Keep watching the destruction. Vance pulled out a series of screenshots and photos that made the audience lean forward. This was about to get personal in a way that exposed not just hypocrisy, but something worse. Exploitation of family for political gain. Let's talk about your grandmother in Puerto Rico. This is a story about priorities, about authenticity, and about whether you actually care about the people you claim to fight for, even when those people are your own family. He showed tweets from June 2021. You posted photos of your grandmother's home in Puerto Rico. The house showed water damage, a damaged roof, deteriorating conditions. You blamed this on the Trump administration's response to Hurricane Maria in 2017. You said, and I quote, "It's been 4 years. Trump failed Puerto Rico and stole billions in aid." You used your grandmother's suffering to make a political point. Vance showed the images. These photos were genuinely concerning. Your grandmother appeared to be living in difficult conditions. Any decent person seeing these would want to help. And that's exactly what happened. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh started a GoFundMe to raise money to repair your grandmother's house. Not to mock you, to actually help. He pulled out the GoFundMe records. Within days, Americans donated over $100 to fix your grandmother's house. People from across the country, many of them conservatives who disagree with your politics, donated because they saw someone in need and wanted to help. That's the American spirit right there. Vance's expression hardened. And what did you do? You refused the money. You said it was in poor taste. You rejected $100 that could have fixed your grandmother's house. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You posted photos of your grandmother's damaged home to score political points against Trump. People offered to help. You refused the help because it came from the wrong people politically. He pulled out follow-up reporting. After you refused the donation, reporters investigated. They interviewed neighbors. They looked into the actual conditions. Questions emerged about whether the photos were representative, whether the situation was as dire as presented, whether this was more about performance than reality. Your grandmother's house wasn't as damaged as the selective photos suggested. You'd used the most dramatic angles to make a political point. Vance showed the timeline. Here's what bothers me most. After you refused the $100, what happened to your grandmother? Did you fix her house? Did you, a member of Congress making $174 a year, use your own money to help? Did you organize a fundraiser among your wealthy friends and supporters? Or did you just move on to the next viral tweet? He pulled out more documentation. There's no evidence you actually helped your grandmother. No evidence the house was repaired. No follow-up posts about fixing the problems you'd photographed. You used her suffering for a political attack, refused help when it was offered, and then abandoned the story once it stopped being politically useful. That's not family values. That's exploitation. Vance compared to his own experience. In my book, I write about my grandmother. Mama, she raised me when my mom couldn't. She struggled financially. She made sacrifices. And when I became successful, I took care of her. That's what you do for family. You don't use them for photo ops and political attacks. You help them. He looked at AOC with genuine disgust. You make $174 a year. You could have easily paid to fix your grandmother's house. You could have accepted the $100 from donors who genuinely wanted to help. Instead, you used her suffering for political points, refused help because it came from conservatives, and never followed up on whether she got the help she needed. That tells me everything about your priorities. Political performance over family. Social media engagement over actually helping people. Even your own grandmother. AOC was defensive. Now, that was a right-wing stunt to distract from Trump's failure in Puerto Rico. It was $100 to help your grandmother. Vance's voice rose. Real money from real people who wanted to help. You could have taken it, fixed her house, thanked the donors, and proven that Americans care about each other across political lines. Instead, you rejected it to maintain your political narrative. You chose politics over your grandmother's well-being. Vance gathered the evidence. This incident reveals who you really are. When your grandmother needed help, you used her for political attacks. When help was offered, you refused it for political reasons. When the story stopped being useful, you abandoned it. You don't actually care about helping people. You care about political performance. And if you'll exploit your own grandmother for political gain, what won't you exploit? 6 rounds of exposing hypocrisy. 2 more coming. Vance pulled out legislative scorecards, voting records, and accomplishment analyses for what he clearly relished as a systematic destruction of not just AOC, but her entire political movement. You're part of the squad. You, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, the 4 horsewomen of progressive politics. You're frequently in the news, constantly on social media, always making headlines. Let's review what you've actually accomplished together. This should be quick because the answer is almost nothing. He laid out the numbers. Combined time in Congress as of 2024. Approximately 16 years total. Major pieces of legislation passed with your names on them. 0 bills that became law that you sponsored. 0. Your legislative strategy appears to be oppose everything. Propose fantasies, accomplish nothing. Vance showed voting records. You voted against the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Actual roads, bridges, broadband, water systems, real infrastructure that helps real people. Why? Because it wasn't progressive enough for you. You preferred nothing over something. You voted against bills your own party leaders supported. Your approach is ideological purity over practical progress. He pulled out committee records. You've been removed from or not appointed to major committees because you can't work with others. You've antagonized your own party leadership. Nancy Pelosi openly mocked your proposals. Chuck Schumer ignores you. You're backbenchers in your own party because you're more interested in Twitter fights than legislative work. Vance compared to his own record. I've been in office less time than your squad collectively and I've accomplished more. As a senator, I worked across the aisle. I passed legislation. I brought investment to Ohio. Now, as vice president, I'm actually governing. What have you done? You've tweeted. You've given speeches. You've proposed impossible policies. But you haven't passed laws. You haven't delivered for your districts. You haven't governed. He showed district data. Let's look at your districts. AOC sees NY14 still struggling economically, especially after you killed Amazon. Omar's MN5 crime has skyrocketed. Tlaib's MI12 hasn't seen the economic revitalization she promised. Presley's MA7 doing okay. But that's Boston. It was doing fine before she got there. None of your districts have meaningfully improved under your representation. Vance pulled out social media statistics. You know what you have accomplished: social media engagement. AOC has 8.7 million Twitter followers. Omar has 3 million. Tlaib has 1.5 million. Presley has 700,000 combined, nearly 14 million followers. Know how many laws you've passed? 0. That's quite a ratio. 14 million followers, 0 legislative accomplishments. He looked at the camera. The squad represents everything wrong with modern politics. They're influencers who happen to hold office. They're activists masquerading as legislators. They're performers pretending to govern. They get attention, but they don't get results. They're good at tweeting, bad at legislating. They're excellent at outrage, terrible at outcomes. Vance turned back to AOC. You and your squad have been in Congress for a combined 16 years. You've passed 0 major legislation. You've delivered 0 significant wins for your constituents. But you've generated millions of social media interactions. Congratulations. You've perfected the art of accomplishing nothing loudly. AOC tried to defend herself. We're pushing the Democratic Party to the left. We're moving the Overton window on important issues. You're accomplishing nothing. Vance cut her off. Moving the Overton window doesn't help your constituents pay rent. It doesn't fix roads. It doesn't create jobs. It doesn't improve schools. Governing helps people. Passing laws helps people. Delivering results helps people. You don't do any of that. You tweet. You give speeches. You appear on podcasts. But you don't govern. He gathered the scorecards. Your constituents elected you to pass laws and deliver results. Instead, you've given them social media content. They need jobs. You killed Amazon. They need infrastructure. You voted against it. They need effective representation. You give them performances. After 6 years, what can you point to as a tangible accomplishment? What law bears your name? What program did you create? What problem did you solve? The answer is nothing. Absolutely nothing. 7 rounds. One final destruction coming. Comment if you're still watching. Vance gathered every document he'd used throughout the debate and arranged them in a comprehensive timeline. This was the final summation. The complete destruction of AOC's career and credibility. Let's review your entire career in Congress. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. I'll be thorough. This won't take long because there's not much substance to review. Just performance hypocrisy and failure. He started at the beginning. June 2018. You won a primary against Joe Crowley, a 10-term incumbent. It was a genuine political upset. The media crowned you the future of progressive politics. You were 28 years old. Charismatic. Social media savvy. You had momentum. Let's see what you did with it. Vance moved through the timeline. January 2019. You take office within weeks. You proposed the Green New Deal, a $93 trillion fantasy that your own party rejected. Your signature legislation was dead on arrival because it was economically impossible and politically toxic. That set the tone for everything that followed. Ambitious rhetoric, impossible proposals, 0 results. He pulled out the Amazon documentation. November 2018. Before you even took office. You lead opposition to Amazon HQ2. February 2019. Amazon withdraws. You celebrate killing 25,000 jobs in your district. Your constituents opposed you. They wanted those jobs. You cost your district 50,000 total jobs and $5 billion in tax revenue. First major action: economic sabotage of your own constituents. Vance showed the Met Gala photos. September 2021. Met Gala $35 party tax, the rich dress. The hypocrisy becomes undeniable. You're not fighting the elite. You joined them. You're just wearing a costume while doing it. He pulled out the ABUA evidence. June 2021. You exploit your grandmother's suffering for political points when Americans offer to help you refuse because they're conservatives. You prioritize politics over family. Classic AOC performance over people. Vance showed legislative records. 6 years in Congress. Major legislation passed 0. Bills with your name that became law 0. Committee assignments lost or never received, major ones because you can't work with others. Relationship with party leadership antagonistic. Nancy Pelosi mocked you. Chuck Schumer ignores you. You're a backbencher in your own party. He displayed social media metrics. But here's what you have accomplished. 8.7 million Twitter followers. Millions of Instagram followers. TikTok star. Media darling. You're famous. You're influential in progressive circles. You're a brand, but you're not a legislator. You don't govern. You perform. Vance pulled out lifestyle documentation. You live in luxury while representing working class people. $2,800 apartment. Designer clothes. Expensive lifestyle. Tesla ownership. Met Gala attendance. You've become the elite you claim to fight. The bartender has become the bourgeoisie. But you still use bartending as a credential 8 years later. He showed economic literacy failures. You have an economics degree you never used. You don't understand tax incentives. You proposed a Green New Deal that economists across the spectrum rejected. You killed jobs because you don't understand how economic development works. You're economically illiterate despite your degree. Vance arranged everything into a comprehensive indictment. Here's your complete record. 0 major legislation. 0 laws with your name. $25 jobs killed in your district. $93 trillion fantasy proposal rejected by your own party. Luxury lifestyle contradicting working class brand. Grandmother exploited for politics. 6 years of performance without results. Millions of followers. 0 accomplishments. You're the perfect symbol of modern progressive politics. All brand, no substance. He looked directly at her. Congresswoman, you represent everything wrong with contemporary American politics. You've turned public service into personal branding. You've confused social media engagement with actual governance. You've prioritized performance over results. Outrage over outcomes. Followers over accomplishments. You're an Instagram influencer who happens to hold a congressional seat. Vance's voice got more forceful. I wrote a book about escaping poverty through education, hard work, and opportunity. It helped millions understand the working class. I served in the Marines. I went to Yale Law. I practiced law. I invested in businesses that created jobs. I was elected to the Senate and passed legislation. I became vice president. At every stage, I've delivered results. You've delivered tweets. He pointed at his timeline. I grew up actually poor. Not performed poverty. Lived it. My mom was addicted to drugs. I slept on my grandparents' couch. We struggled. I escaped through the Marines. Through education. Through merit. I understand the working class because I was working class. You perform working class identity while living an elite lifestyle. You appropriate working class struggle for political benefit. That's not representation. That's exploitation. Vance's final statement was devastating. You had every advantage. You got an economics degree from Boston University. Advantages millions of Americans don't have. You got elected to Congress at 28. An opportunity very few people ever get. You had momentum, media attention, national platform. What did you do with it? You killed jobs in your district. You proposed impossible fantasies. You built a social media brand. You attended elite parties. You lived in luxury. And you accomplished absolutely nothing for the people you claim to represent. He gathered all his evidence. 6 years in Congress. 0 legislative accomplishments. Negative economic impact on your district. Massive hypocrisy between your brand and your lifestyle. Exploitation of family for politics. Complete failure to deliver results. But you're famous. You have followers. You're a brand. And that's all you care about. The brand, not the work. The performance, not the results. The engagement, not the governance. Vance looked at the camera for his final words. America deserves better than this. We deserve leaders who govern, not perform. Who deliver results, not tweets. Who pass laws, not post content. Who understand economics, not just economic slogans. Who actually help people instead of using them for political theater. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is the opposite of what we need. She's all style, no substance. All brand, no achievement. All performance, no results. And after 6 years, her record proves it beyond any doubt. The room sat in absolute silence. AOC looked like she'd been intellectually demolished because she had been. Lester Holt looked stunned. The audience was processing what they'd witnessed. A complete systematic evidence-based destruction of a political phenomenon. J.D. Vance had just done what the media should have done years ago. Held AOC accountable for her record. Exposed the gap between her brand and reality. And proven that substance beats style when they're forced to compete directly. The video went viral so fast that social media platforms struggled to handle the traffic. Within 1 week, it had accumulated over 200 million views across all platforms. Not clips, people watched the entire 2-hour debate mesmerized by Vance's systematic demolition. NBC's post-debate poll showed 71% of respondents said Vance won decisively. Not just won decisively. Independents went 78-22 for Vance. Even Democrats were split, with 38% admitting Vance had presented stronger arguments backed by better evidence. Liberal commentators tried to defend AOC, but they struggled. How do you defend someone who killed 25,000 jobs in her own district? How do you explain the Met Gala hypocrisy? How do you justify 0 legislative accomplishments in 6 years? The best they could do was argue Vance was mean or that he'd attacked her. But when pressed on the facts, they had no defense. Even sympathetic outlets had to acknowledge reality. The New York Times ran an analysis. Vance's criticisms of Ocasio-Cortez's legislative record are largely accurate. In 6 years, she has not passed major legislation. The Washington Post fact-checked the debate. Vance's claims about the Amazon deal, the Green New Deal costs, and AOC's lifestyle are supported by public records. But the real impact came in AOC's own district. Within 48 hours, community groups organized town halls demanding actual results. Longtime supporters held press conferences expressing disappointment. A poll showed her approval in NY14 had dropped to 53%, still winning, but down from 70+% just months earlier. More significantly, a Democratic primary challenger emerged: Marcus Rodriguez, a small business owner who'd lost contracts when Amazon pulled out. His entire campaign was built on one slogan: results over retweets. His launch video simply showed the debate highlights of Vance destroying AOC's record. Followed by 6 years, 0 laws passed. It's time for actual representation. The progressive movement fractured. Some defended AOC as a victim of right-wing attacks, but many younger progressives quietly acknowledged the problem. They'd elevated someone who was better at social media than governing. The squad's influence within the Democratic Party began declining almost immediately. Pelosi and Schumer stopped taking their calls. Committee assignments went to moderates. The era of squad dominance was ending. AOC's social media engagement dropped noticeably. Her tweets got fewer likes, fewer retweets, fewer shares. People were tired of the performance. They'd seen behind the curtain. They knew she was all brand, no substance. The influencer magic had worn off. Her speaking fees collapsed. Organizations that had paid $20 for her to appear at events suddenly found other speakers. Why pay premium rates for someone who'd been exposed as ineffective? Her book deal for a memoir was quietly canceled. Publishers wanted substance, not another social media personality's life story. When she ran for re-election in 2024, she won. It was still a safe Democratic district, but she won by only 15 points instead of her usual 30+. Marcus Rodriguez got 42% of the primary vote despite being outspent 5-1. The message was clear. Her constituents were losing patience. The national impact was even more significant. Moderate Democrats used the debate to argue against the progressive wing. See what happens when we nominate performers instead of governors became a common refrain. The 2024 Democratic primary shifted noticeably toward candidates with actual legislative accomplishments. Conservative movement leaders were energized. Vance had proven that when progressive performance politics are confronted with serious conservative governance, the performance collapses. He'd shown that credentials without competence can be exposed. He demonstrated that social media popularity is no substitute for actual achievement. But perhaps the most symbolic moment came 3 months after the debate. AOC deleted her Tesla tweets. She stopped posting luxury lifestyle content. She started wearing less expensive clothes to public events. She was trying to rebuild her working-class brand. But everyone had seen the truth. The costume had been removed and they couldn't unsee what was underneath. The debate became required viewing in political science courses. The Vance-AOC debate was analyzed as a masterclass in how to systematically dismantle a political opponent using their own record. Students studied Vance's preparation, his evidence organization, his calm delivery of devastating facts. But for ordinary Americans, especially those over 60 who valued substance over style, it was simpler than that. They'd watched a Yale-educated Marine veteran who'd actually escaped poverty through merit destroy an Instagram socialist who performed poverty while living in luxury. They'd seen someone who'd actually accomplished things expose someone who'd accomplished nothing but social media fame. J.D. Vance had grown up in genuine poverty in Appalachia, joined the Marines, graduated from Yale Law, wrote a best-selling book that helped millions understand the working class, invested in businesses that created jobs, served in the Senate, and became vice president. At every stage, he delivered results. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had grown up middle class in Westchester. Gotten an economics degree she never used. Bartended for 8 years. Won one election. Killed 25,000 jobs in her district. Proposed a $93 trillion fantasy. Lived in luxury while performing as working class. Accomplished 0 legislative goals. And built a social media brand. The debate proved which approach America needs. Governance over performance. Substance over style. Results over retweets. 2 years after the debate, AOC was still in Congress. Still tweeting. Still posting. But she was diminished. Her influence had waned. Her squad was scattered. Her proposals were ignored. She'd become what Vance had called her, a backbencher with good social media skills. Vance, meanwhile, continued governing, continued delivering results, continued proving that serious people who do serious work matter more than performers who tweet. The message resonated far beyond that debate stage. America needs leaders who govern, not influencers who perform. We need people who deliver results, not people who deliver content. We need substance, not style. Achievement, not engagement. Work, not performance. J.D. Vance proved it. AOC's collapsed credibility proved it. And American voters learned the lesson. When reality confronts social media, reality wins. Every single time, Vice President J.D. Vance did what needed to be done. He brought facts, experience, and actual accomplishments to destroy AOC's performance politics. Economics degree. She never used professionally. Amazon jobs. She killed 25,000 of them. Green New Deal. Impossible fantasy costing $93 trillion. Luxury lifestyle contradicting working class brand. Abua exploitation Met Gala hypocrisy. 6 years in Congress. 0 laws passed. All exposed by someone who actually escaped poverty through merit. Served his country. Got educated. And governed effectively. Share this with everyone tired of Instagram socialism and social media politicians who accomplished nothing. Comment below. Do we want governance or performance? Results or retweets? Substance or style? Because this debate proved that when authentic achievement confronts performative politics, achievement wins decisively. Vance proved it with facts. AOC's record proved she had no defense against those facts. The era of social media politicians who tweet instead of govern is ending. And debates like this are accelerating that end because Americans are tired of influencers masquerading as leaders. We want people who actually do the work, deliver the results, and govern effectively, not people who perform for Instagram while accomplishing nothing. Facts don't care about your followers. Results matter more than retweets. And when someone like J.D. Vance, who actually lived poverty, served his country, got educated, and delivered results, confront someone like AOC, who performs poverty while living in luxury, the outcome is inevitable. Reality wins every